This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
I'm Georgia and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that reminds you of the good in the world. Each episode tells the story of someone who has found real hope in challenging times and made the world a better place. Episode 50, Megan Owen Cox. My next guest, Megan Owen Cox, is an absolute force of nature. We're travelling well beyond Sydney today, all the way to Denver, Colorado, where Megan lives with her 4 children. In 2011, Megan escaped an abusive marriage with 4 small kids in tow, enduring poverty and, heartbreakingly, harassment from her own family and church community. Experience is enough to break anyone, but Megan rebuilt her life from the ground up. In 2012, she developed a non-profit to serve single mothers like herself who were leaving abuse without support. And in 2021, she started her own counselling practice as a pastoral trauma counsellor. It is an honour to have her on the show today. Thank you so much for joining me, Megan.
I am so thrilled to be here, Georgia. Thank you for having me.
Megan, to start, what exactly is a pastoral trauma counsellor in layperson's terms, as someone who doesn't know anything about psychology much?
It's a great question. So I combine theological education with trauma counseling so I can bring in the spiritual if my clients would like that. I'm also an ordained minister and a chaplain on the weekends, hospice chaplain. And so it's a great combination of the spiritual along with some of the traditional trauma modalities such as EMDR, DNMS, talk therapy, that sort of thing.
So how exactly do you bring in the spiritual to your sessions?
Mm-hmm. One of my specialties, actually, Georgia, is religious trauma. And that is reserved for people who maybe have grown up in hyper-conservative or fundamental family system or paradigm, church system. I don't know if you've heard of the documentary Shiny Happy People.
Yes.
Yeah, you have. It's all the rage here among my circles. And so I've been existing for a couple of years to help people who have experienced trauma at the hands of people who are abusive in those religious contexts.
And have you yourself experienced trauma and abuse in that way?
I have. So in the marriage from which I escaped, the one you just spoke of, I was very abused. In fact, I was so spiritually abused, I thought I was going to hell for leaving him. But I just thought I was giving my children a chance. That's how bad the spiritual abuse was. And so it's sort of a Mennonite, Baptist, Russian sort of culty group in Europe that my husband grew up in and was a big part of.
Right. Wow. We'll talk about that a bit more later. What was your experience of church and faith growing up? Was it always kind of in that conservative space?
No, I actually was raised Episcopalian, and it might have been my saving grace because I knew that what I was experiencing had no good fruit. There was no good fruit from the theology. And I grew up with loving parents. I lost my parents in a car accident when I was 24 and was very vulnerable, got married very quickly. You can imagine what that was like. And I had enough, sort of Bible-based teaching. I'm putting kind of air quotes on that because I don't think it was all actually Bible-based teaching, to believe that divorce was not an option. So I stayed in a horrendous, pathological marriage for almost 12 years, thinking that I had to, that I didn't have the choice.
I think for people who haven't been in abusive relationships, it can be so hard to understand almost like how you get into them, but also why you don't leave. What was it? How did you meet your husband? What was it that drew you to him in the first place?
I met him at my Christian college where I was attending school. and he wanted to be a pastor, and I thought he would be a good husband, a good father. Um, I understand now that he was controlling. At the time, I thought maybe he was protective. I had a lot of naivete. I also was attracted to the fact that he was close to his family, which now I understand is a cult. So at the time, though, because just having lost my parents, I thought, oh my goodness, here's this beautiful family and they'll love me, and nothing. I mean, there was no real love there. It was all just control. And so for people who don't know what it's like to be in an abusive relationship, it can be death by 1,000 cuts. It can start off with, a few maybe pink flags where you think, okay, that was really strange. And then you get used to it and it becomes
what were some examples of that for you?
Some pink flags.
Yeah.
Let me think. This was a long time ago, but I do remember that the night before we got married, he told me that his parents had begged him not to marry me and that they weren't happy with it. And as you can imagine, that just pulled the rug out from underneath everything. And then he said, but I love you and we'll make our own family, that sort of thing.
Oh.
Right. And so from the get-go, my relationship with his family was going to be, there was an imbalance of power. I was the unwanted one. It was precarious. Other things, making me second guess myself, sort of, we call it gaslighting, but maybe he would say something to me and I'd say something back, and then he'd say he didn't say that first thing, to where I thought maybe I was losing my mind a little bit. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I was just grieving really hard. And then that became my normal. And then I was the frog in the boiling water. The frog is in there and doesn't realize how bad it is. And it wasn't till a friend of mine came to visit a year or two before I left him. And the friend was male. He was visiting us. He had a job interview in the area. And he looked at me. I remember exactly where I was standing in the kitchen. My youngest was a newborn. And this man said, "What you're living in is not normal. Do you know that? You have to know that." So that was my first sort of glimmer into the fact that it was just as bad as I was feeling like it was. I thought it was my fault. I thought it was me.
And that validation from someone else, that's when it all started to drop. The penny started to drop.
Exactly. Yeah. Which anybody who's been in an abusive relationship knows that when the penny drops and the mask falls a little bit, things get harder and get much worse at that point. Because now he knows that he's abusive, and his grip gets tighter. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow. Oh, Megan. I know this must be so hard to talk about. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing. Tell me about that moment you decided to leave. Was there a moment where you're like, I have to get out of here? Or was it a series that a kind of build up, or both?
It probably was both, Georgia. The first time I left, I tried to leave. I had a newborn. I had no family support. I told you my parents were gone. I was going to the airport, and I remember thinking, what am I going to do when I get there? I don't have money to, we shared a bank account. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was very vulnerable. I was terrified. And I went back, and then we moved to Europe, and things got so much worse there. And actually what happened was I had an English-speaking friend who lived around the corner named Dorothy, and she noticed the bruises that were always on our arms. So he would kind of drag us around, by grabbing our upper arms, and she saw them on my two older kids, and she saw them on me. She asked, And I talked with her, and the look on her face was about what your face looks like right now. Just, she was horrified. But again, it was my normal. I had been doing that for so long, surviving that for so long. And so a couple weeks later, he did something to one of my kids that was unconscionable. And again, I was in a cult mindset. And so I had a lot of cognitive dissonance. But I'm supposed to suffer, but I'm supposed to stay. I'm supposed to be a good wife. And maybe if I'm sweeter or more submissive, all of the junk. And I remember we were in Germany because that's where we lived at the time. I sat down on our bed and I kind of looked out our window, and I felt like God was saying, you've got to go. You can go now. It's okay to go. And that very friend who had noticed the bruises paid for all of us to come back to the United States.
Oh, wow.
2 weeks later. And it wasn't 2 weeks later. It was like 2 days later. And we never looked back. Never went back. That was in 2011.
That's incredible. But, you came back, you had, no money, no, in terms of, you'd been dependent on this person for so long. You had 4 young kids. What was the situation like the first few months coming back here?
It was rough. It was really, really rough. As you're talking about it and I'm thinking back to it, I still can't believe I did that. There was a sense of peace and relief, and also in the same space, just absolute terror. I shook physically for weeks. I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't sleep. I was so scared. I didn't have any family support. I had a dear friend who was she was a lone wolf. She just kind of would show up, and she brought a birthday cake for my daughter who turned 3 during those first couple weeks. And then eventually I got a job in a small town, a state over in Nebraska. She drove us out there. We lived in a very, very small 700 square foot place, disturbingly small. And I started working at my kids' school, teaching remedial reading. I started teaching piano lessons after school. I just pieced it together, bought a car, really just started over. We lost everything when we came here back to the States.
Why did you said you endured harassment from your family and your church in those months. I can understand why now, since you're in a literal cult, but what kind of happened there? Were they doing this over, you're a continents over, were they doing this via email, social media? What was the situation?
Yes, and yes. So very public blogs. Here's the thing that happened, Georgia. By the time I had landed back in the States, my ex-husband, then husband, had contacted everybody in my family, told them I was crazy, told them I needed to come back, I needed psychological help.
Is this your extended family?
Sisters,
Yeah.
Mostly my sisters, aunts and uncles. They didn't believe me. They didn't believe that we had been abused. They didn't even believe my children. There a lot of crazy when I look back over it, and a lot of blur. And now, being 12 years out of that, thinking that maybe they did know that I was being abused and they didn't do anything. Or maybe they were afraid they would look bad if it came out and people knew that we had been abused and they didn't do anything. They also were sort of entrenched in some of the more conservative denominations and didn't believe in divorce either. And you need to go back to him. And there was a very precarious moment where I almost did. I felt like I was being starved in every way.
When was this?
This was in 2011, where I had legitimate needs for my children and me. I'd been a stay-at-home mom. I had been a homeschool mom. Didn't know how to get a job very well. And I had return tickets. And I really thought about it. And my family was pushing for it. And I felt penned in on all sides. Just, I didn't have the cognitive understanding of abuse yet. I hadn't even used the word, to be honest. I had not even used that word yet. And then I found a place to live and got the job. And my friend, who had been so supportive, told me years later, she said, I would have let you go back to Germany because I would never want to control you, or, I would have respected your decision, really. She said, but I was afraid he was going to kill you. She said, I just knew that's what was going to happen. So, I don't know, just kind of a mob mentality with my family. I was always a little bit scapegoated by my siblings. Everything was always my fault. And then one thing that a lot of people don't know is that I'm on the spectrum. I'm ASD on the spectrum. And so I didn't always know how to respond to somebody not believing me, because I believe everybody when they say things, So, so I just, a lot of people, Georgia, a lot of people don't psychologically survive leaving abuse with their little children and then being ostracized by their families. Behind everything they did and said, I thought, they're just trying to get me to go back there. They're just trying to get me to go back there. And nobody felt safe anymore. And I remember at one point in 2013, literally holding my head, just asking God to hold the pieces of my brain together. I was afraid I was going to fracture from the pain and the hypervigilance surrounding all of that.
But you didn't break. You rebuilt your life. And in a year later, I think, you realized that you wanted to do something for other women in your situation. You developed this nonprofit to help single women who are leaving abuse without support. Tell me more about that.
Yes. So essentially, I'll tell you. I remember I was in that little tiny house and I was just feeling the lowest of the low, not sure where we were going to go from there. And I remember sort of shaking my fist at God and saying, what am I supposed to do now? Like, all I've ever done is try to be obedient, try to be the best version of myself. I even tried to marry a pastor. I mean, I didn't try to marry him. I did marry him. I married a pastor. I've loved my children so deeply. I've loved my family. And he said to me, I want you to love others. And I shook my hand, I started to pound on the ground. And I said, what the hell does that mean? What the hell do you mean? That's the most trite answer. What does that even mean? So that began my journey of truly learning how to love others, how to give in a grace-filled and beautiful way. We had been given clothes would be dropped off, cans of food would be dropped off. And that was lovely, but also you could tell that was just stuff people didn't want. I wanted to be able to give to other people what I did not have. And in 2012, I started a nonprofit. We developed I just worked really hard. We developed a giving philosophy. And pretty soon we were raising enough money to help single mothers who have no support. Maybe they've been turned out of their churches or their families like I had been. And we started paying their bills and it just grew. And I worked so hard on that.
How did you get the word out there and get connected with these people? Because sometimes people who are suffering abuse are in the shadows, even of their own communities, and people don't know.
At the time, social media. I somehow sort of slid into that time where platforms on social media were new. I started writing about my own journey and my own story. And I also was writing for another blog called Crying Out for Justice, who also were trying to reach the women who were being abused in the church and didn't have any recourse. And so women would write in and say, oh my goodness, I know so much about this. And pretty soon I was vetting them, and pretty soon other people were getting in on it. And then it just really grew from there. It really grew from there. By the end of that time, I actually developed an advocacy course for pastors to take. It's still running, and that money goes to the nonprofit, but it's to help people understand what it's like to go through what I went through. And that was marvelous. I did that for 7 years. And then I knew it was time for a younger, more millennial, I love your smile, CEO to take over. I developed something called founder syndrome, where my face was just everywhere. So with a lot of proper guidance from Joan Gary and other nonprofit gurus, I was able to transfer that leadership over. And then I started my own counseling practice, which is what I do now.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a sec. Was it difficult to give that over? Because you literally, you built it from scratch. I know it can be so difficult to literally hand that and say, okay, it's yours now. Do with it what you will. Scary.
Well, sounds like something you know a lot about, Georgia.
Just a
Only
little bit.
people who have been there only people who've been there ask that question. But yes, it was very, very painful. It was like giving my baby away. It was my baby, and I had nurtured it, and I knew how to do the things. And so, yes, it was very challenging. I had to not look. I can't look, because you know what I'm talking about. Just focus on my new baby and trying to pour into that, because yeah, it is challenging, but I know it's doing well, and that just thrills me.
So you started a counselling practice in 2021, literally in the midst of COVID. What brought that on?
Okay, well, it's a little bit of a mystical story. I try to go where I see there's a need, and that's just kind of how I've lived my life for the past 15 years or so. And so I actually was a chaplain in a hospital 2 months before COVID hit. And so I knew exactly what I was doing there, why I was supposed to be there. I was there for about 6 months. It was always going to be a temporary job. Then I heard that the suicide call rate for the state of Colorado had gone up by 7,000% because of COVID. So I went over there and I did that for about 6 months. And then I was quarantined up here in my office. I was quarantined, and my children were bringing me food because I'd been exposed. And I was laying on my yoga mat, and I knew God said, it's time. It's rare to have a trauma-informed counselor who can bring in a pastoral perspective, who also has lived experience. And I can say, yeah, I've been there. I've done that. I know how hard it is to be healing from trauma when you're trying to raise your children. I know what that's like to feel unwanted by your family. And so it's a unique practice. Yeah, I've loved every minute of it.
Oh, it's fantastic. I love how it says on your website that you walk through the fire to help your clients find healing. I love that phrase so much. What does that actually involve, walking through the fire with people?
Well, it's probably, now that you say that, I hadn't thought about it till just this second, but it comes a lot from my experience. As I was walking through the fire, I'm pretty sure I was awful overwhelming to anybody who was trying to help me. And we're humans, and we don't always know what to do. We don't even sometimes want to admit that somebody's standing there burning, because we just don't know what to do. And so my commitment has been I will figure it out with you. I'm not going to just say, well, that's not my bailiwick, or, that's really heavy, so let me just refer you over. I'm going to do what I can to figure it out with you. And sometimes that just means standing in the fire with somebody. That's probably what I needed most, was just, this is hard, and I'm going to be there with you in the hard. Not fixing, but companioning.
I think it's rare to hear a therapist say, not going to fix this for you. That's amazing. I genuinely love that, because I think we put so much pressure on ourselves that, we need to be fixed. We need to fix ourselves. We need someone to fix us.
Well, and that's what causes burnout, is counselors thinking they can fix people. That's way too much of a burden. But I see more transformation. My specialty outside of religious trauma is complex PTSD. And a lot of that can find healing just by the therapeutic relationship. I think people are marvelous. I marvel over human beings. Why would I want to fix them? They're amazing, just like they're miraculous even.
I love that. I also want to talk about, also on your website, you aim to serve ex-evangelicals. Now, I feel like this is becoming a term that is becoming finally more and more well-known, as young people especially kind of re-examine their faith, the church, deciding what doesn't fit them. What do churches need to do better, or do we need to re-examine the way church looks altogether in order to more accurately reflect what Christianity should be?
Goodness, I could talk for hours on those two questions. Thank you, Georgia.
You're welcome.
So I think the first question was the evangelical question. So what we have now is a new wave of people saying we need reform. Georgia, what kept me in abuse for 12 years wasn't because my hands were shackled to my home. It was because I had taken in poor theology and not done the work myself to figure out who God is. And so I think we have a combination of an entity that values power and control, and in particular men, and I know men can be abused, and I've worked with male victims of abuse, but in the evangelical church, we have men who are attracted to the idea that men are in charge. And those men who are attracted to the idea may already have that sense of entitlement, maybe pathologized already, maybe pathological already. And so we have a lot of poor theology running around. And that's what I help clients work to undo. So an example of that might be, and this is pretty common, but my ex-husband used to say, well, you were the woman. You're made from the rib of man. And so you have to do what I say. And you're a helpmeet was the word he used to use, which is so gross to me. It sounds like hamburger helper to me, but helpmeet. Or helper. That's what you were designed to be, my helper. And then he got to decide what that meant, right? So actually, if you go and you look at that word in the original Hebrew, what you find out is that word means, the word in Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, is ezer kenegdo. And that word means lifesaver. That's the word used for woman. in the original Hebrew manuscripts. And that same word has been used for the Holy Spirit swooping down to rescue people in the last minute, the Ezer Kenegdo. That's a whole different story. So my whole abusive relationship was based on a poor translation of that word, and it's being taught all over the country, all over. I don't know if it's going on in Sydney too.
Yes.
But yep. Yeah. So, and how that one poor dogma can spread like wildflower. How is that? Because it's very tempting for men, especially men who maybe have a broken ego, maybe men who don't like themselves very much. They may be men who are treated badly everywhere else, but in the home, he's the king of the castle. And so it's a pretty rotten combination. So I'm over here in my little corner of the world, just bit by bit, trying to say, actually, let's shed light on that. Actually, let's shed light on that. So I incorporate that into the trauma modalities because the truth sets us free, right?
Do you go to church now? Are you in a church community?
I'm not. I guess your second question was maybe we need a reformation altogether. And I do think that we do. I think that we need to get back to what Christianity is about. What is it about? Loving God, loving others as you love yourself. How does that look in our community? For me, it looked like being a chaplain during COVID and answering suicide hotline calls and helping people heal now. And then on weekends, I don't go to church, but I'm a chaplain, a hospice chaplain, and that's my little flock on the weekends. So that's my personal understanding. God cares very much for injustice. He makes a big deal over the orphan, the widow, the poor, the foreigner. And so that's where I'm looking. What's God doing and how can I be a part of it? And I have a lot of believers surrounding me who feel the same way. And we will have table fellowship. Maybe we'll have dinner. People come to our house and stay here. We have a very open home, that sort of thing.
I love that. I want to talk a little bit about your work as a hospice chaplain as well. I find that so interesting and such an incredibly hard and rewarding career to have. How have you seen God work through your experiences in the hospice?
Oh my goodness. Every weekend, something wickedly mysterious happens. And I'm just blown away by the power of that sacred passage towards death. So my job is to help take care of any spiritual pain for people who are dying, basically. And so I sort of make rounds all over the city of Denver, sometimes in a facility like in a hospital or in our care center, our main care center. And I talk with people who are grieving. I talk with people who are dying, who are scared. Maybe people have unresolved issues they need to talk about. Maybe there's reconciliation that needs to happen. But it's important to me. It feels important. And brings a lot of peace to people who are dying.
This is a huge question. Now I realize I'm about to ask it. Who is God to you?
That is a huge question. I don't know anything apart from God. God is creator. I'm trying not to just sound Christianese because I don't want to do that. God is the manifester of humanity. God is relational. God is what I see when I look into the face of somebody dying or into the face of one of my children and I know them. I experience God when I see the person in front of me and I endeavor to understand their plight. God is creative. God is my safety. I could go on and on.
I think that's an amazing way to end. Megan, Owen Cox, it has been a true pleasure. I have learnt so much from your conversation. I could just keep talking to you for hours and hours. But I'll have to save that for another time. Thank you so much for being on Finding Hope today and for sharing your incredible journey. The work that you're doing is so, so important. So keep being amazing. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Georgia. And to those of you who are listening, you can rebuild. You can rebuild. It can be done. So thank you for having me and allowing me the space to talk about some of my most favorite things.
Thank you to Megan Owen Cox for sharing her incredible story. For more on Megan's work, you can visit mountaincitychristiancounselling.com. And for information on her own podcast called Pretty Psych, you can visit our show notes. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends. Stories are always better when they're shared, and you never know what someone can learn from another's journey. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147, verse 3. Catch you next time.